All right. Good morning, everyone. Good morning once again. Really, really wonderful to have all of you here today with us. And as always, Motivational Monday really aims to start your week off with a dose of positivity. And I must say, we are certainly most privileged to have with us Dr. Paul Schempp, who is known as an expert of expertise or expert of experts. So, really privileged to have you with us, Paul. You want to say hello to our coaches here in Singapore and maybe overseas as well?
Yeah, thank you, Azar. It's delightful to be here. As you know, I've spent significant time in Singapore, and it feels like a second home to me. So being here with you is a very much a privilege. So thank you.
Yeah, yeah. You want to show off some of your Singlish skills to the Singaporeans?
Yeah. I'm not very good, lah.
All right, that's good enough. Yeah. So let me just pull out what I have here so that our friends and coaches who are with us will know a little bit more about you, Paul. So, yeah, no stranger to all of us here in Singapore, many of us here in Singapore. You've been to our shores a number of times and spent some time here previously also as a professor under the E.W. Barker scholarship or professorship. So for our coaches and our audience out there, and we are also live on Facebook. So for all of us tuning in, Dr. Paul Schempp is currently a professor at the University of Georgia. He conducts extensive research into characteristics and development of expert sport coaches. And I think in Singapore, we certainly want to go into that area. We want to develop a lot more Singaporean coaches who are, would be deemed expert or experts. Yeah. Paul has authored 6 books, delivered more than 300 programs across 36 countries, as you see there, and across 4 continents as well. So clients of his includes Atlanta Hawks, the Nets, English Golf Union, General Electric, the NBA, NIE, of course, professional golfers of Americas, in Sweden, in Switzerland, Taiwan, US Army, you name it. He's is someone with a lot of experience, a wealth of experience, if I may say, and we certainly would, look forward to hearing from you, Paul. And your topic for today is really apt in that we're looking at how expert coaches build and lead successful teams. So, that leaves us to hear from you, Paul. If you could share your slides, and we can begin.
All right, that sounds wonderful. Let's do this. Let me, first of all, thank you for that lovely introduction. And I'm absolutely honored to be here with you. As I said, Singapore is very near and dear to my heart. I've got many friends there still, and I wish I could be there in person with you, but we're all fighting through this pandemic, and let's hope it ends fairly soon. We all on this call this morning have something in common. And that's why you're here. You want to know, what does it take to be a great coach? Well, that was my question about 30 years ago when I graduated from a physical education program, and I was going to be a teacher and a coach. And I don't know what your early experiences were, but when I started, I thought, well, pretty much anybody could do this. I was a student and it didn't look that hard. I was an athlete, and I thought in most cases I could be a better coach than the coaches I had. Well, experience was a quick and a severe teacher to me, because it taught me that I really didn't know nearly as much as I thought I did. And I didn't want to spend the rest of my career in something I loved, but something that I was tragically poor at executing. So for whatever reason, I thought I'll go back to the university and get another degree, and maybe I'll learn more about coaching and teaching. Well, that didn't happen. But what I did learn is I learned how to do research. So at the end of my time at university, they said, Paul, it's time for you to do your doctoral dissertation. What would you like to study? And my answer was, it's not so much what I would like to study, it was who I would like to study. I would like to study great coaches, because if I could understand what they do For example, there's one on this call right now, Coach K, Mr. K. I've had the opportunity to watch him teach and coach, and I've seen his colleagues who are also very credible teachers and coaches, but there's something magical in watching Mr. K work with students and work with athletes. What does he do differently that the rest of us don't, or at least in my case, that I didn't do? And so I've spent the last 30 years trying to figure that out. And what I'm going to share with you this morning is just a few of the things that I've discovered. I've got a relatively extensive list of it, but I thought in talking with Azar and some of the other people at the Singapore Sports Council, that where you are, maybe one of these 4 strategies might be helpful to you. And these are strategies that I've seen across what I consider expert coaches. So before I get into those strategies, let me tell you the types of people we've studied. We study people who are consistently successful at the highest level of their sport. So that means we study professional coaches, coaches that run professional teams, national coaches. We study in the United States Division I university coaches. For example, Eddie Reese, who was Joseph Schooling's coach at the University of Texas. It would be people like that. We've also studied an extensive number of Olympic coaches. And the Olympic coaches we've studied are coaches who have had multiple medal winners over several Olympics. And so we've been privileged to have the opportunity to study some really great coaches. And what we look for is, what do they have in common? And here are 4 of the things that we find that almost every great coach does. And I'm going to share that with you. And let's start out with, it doesn't matter the level or the sport that you coach. Let me say that again. It doesn't matter the level or the sport you coach. The principles that will make you successful as a coach and your athletes successful are basically the same, whether you're talking about coaching 8-year-olds in football or you're talking about 25-year-olds at an international level in football or track and field athletics. Some of the principles apply across. All right. So here's 4 that I thought might be helpful for you. The first one is creating culture. And that means a culture of the team, a culture around you, your assistant coaches, for example, your athletes. There has to be a set of values that bind you together, that you share, that make you, if you will, like a family. And those values are what actually leads to your actions. Your actions are a manifestation of what you feel and what you believe. And it's your actions, I think you'll all agree with this, as a coach, that ultimately influences the outcome. So if you don't have clarity as to what my values are and what my team's values are, it's very hard to be successful. Next, we find that preparing, and by the way, I'm going to go back and I'm going to spend a little time on each of these 4. I'm just kind of giving you the overview of where we're going this morning in our hour together. Next, you've got to prepare. I think you'll all agree it's a key to success in a very uncertain future. And in studying the expert coaches, we find some of the things they do are a little bit different than what we traditionally think of planning and preparing as a coach. So I'm going to share some secrets with you there. And then next, seeing and seizing opportunities. Let me tell you this. You cannot be a leader in the field of sport by doing what everybody else does. That's the definition of average. That's the definition of mediocre. The great coaches see opportunities and they seize opportunities. And this morning, I'm going to give you a very clear example of just how you can do that with your team and your athletes. And then finally, control. You got to take command over the things that are going to make you successful. Specifically, what that means is that you have to control the controllables, the things that are under your control, and you have to give up the things that you cannot control. For example, you can't control the pandemic right now. If you could, by the way, please let me know, and you'll solve a huge problem facing the entire world. But most of us can't do that. But what can we control? We can control, for example, our reactions to that. All right. So let's start and take a look at if these 4 strategies, if you will, and see how they might help you to become a better coach. And I'd like to start with creating culture. And I'm going to do that by taking you to Athens, Greece. The year was 2004. It was the Olympic Games. The team, the United States men's basketball team. 12 of the greatest players on the planet. No team in the Olympics in basketball came close to how great these 12 players were. So great was this team is they thought they were going to walk away from the Olympics with the gold medal with hardly breaking a sweat. Well, that didn't happen. With 3 losses, they were lucky to leave Athens with a bronze medal. Now, as a coach, if you have the best players in the world, you don't go for the bronze. So something needed to change. Now, USA Basketball says, well, what are we going to change? Well, you got the greatest players. You're not going to change those players. So they made a coaching change. And they brought somebody in that they thought, and by the way, his name was also Coach K. He's the short guy in the middle. His name is Mike Krzyzewski. He was actually a college coach, a very successful college basketball coach, not a professional coach. And what Mike did to win the gold medal, as you can see, they're all around his neck, was something a little unusual. He created a culture. And I'm going to share with you right now exactly how he did that. As soon as Mike was named the national coach for the men's basketball team, he made a phone call. He called the gentleman to his right. Well, actually, his left, our right. His name is Jason Kidd. Jason was the oldest player on the team, highly respected by his teammates, and was somebody that was considered to be a leader on the floor or during the game. And he said, Jason, if we're going to be successful, if we're going to win the gold medal, and that was the standard they were after, we all have to share a set of values, a set of beliefs that will guide what we do, but more importantly, bring us together as a unit. So do you believe or do you agree with me that we have to have a shared set of values? And Jason, fortunately, said, yes, I do. So Mike asked him this question. He said, what values do you think we need to share as a team in order to be successful? So he gave Mike a couple of ideas, and Mike wrote them down. Mike made a second phone call to the gentleman directly behind Jason Kidd. That's a very young LeBron James. LeBron James was considered, and still is to this day, the greatest basketball player on that team. And so Mike knew that other players respected him. And as the greatest player, if he wasn't buying into, if you will, the culture, the values, it wasn't going to go anywhere. So he said the same thing to LeBron. He said, LeBron, if we are going to be successful, I believe we have to have a shared set of values that represent who we are as a team, as a unit. Do you agree with that? And LeBron said, most certainly I do. And so LeBron gave him some ideas about what these standards or these values should be. So the very first meeting that they had with the players, they all came in and Mike had a little notebook for all of them. And Mike shared the story of talking with Jason and talking with LeBron. And then he asked the rest of the team, do you also agree that if we're going to be successful, we have to have a culture of success? We have to have a set of values, a set of standards. And they called them the gold standards because the goal was to win the gold medal. And all the players said, yeah. And so it began a discussion about what values do we need to share and embrace and live out as a team in order to be successful. You interested to know what those values were? Those gold standards? Here they are. Now, is it something that you believe you need to do with your team? I can't make that decision for you. That is something that you need to decide as a coach. But what I will tell you is that almost every great coach I've ever known has a set of values. They have, and it's instilled in the team. Now, most coaches try to get the team to be part of shaping those values, identifying those values, because it's going to be something that we all live together. Now, think about the team and the athletes that you coach, even if it's just something that represents you and one other person, one other athlete. For example, with the ability to communicate with one another, do we feel like we need to have clear communication? Or trust, is that an important value that we need to have? How about pride in who we are, pride in the country we represent, or the team that we represent? Do we need to have some level of enthusiasm? So what I'm sharing with you here is, this is the beginning. This is the foundation for any great team. And I'm going to guess that if you look at a team that's not successful, if it's a team that can't agree on what they're doing, it's probably a team that doesn't really have a clear set of values, a clear culture, if you will. And I know in the Singapore Sports Group that you're always looking for values. It's one of the things, in my opinion, that allowed Singapore to go from basically a poor, disowned country in the early 1960s. Obviously, you had a great leader in Lee Kuan Yew, but there was a shared sense of values, a work ethic that allowed Singapore to have a culture that allowed them to be successful to right up until today, and I think it's going to make Singapore successful in the future. It's a principle that applies to all great organizations. And if you want your team to be successful, I would strongly consider you to consider what your culture is going to be, what your values are. And as a coach, you may make the decision that here's our values as a team. For most people, it's let's work with my athletes. Even young athletes can begin to be part of this discussion. All right, so we have a culture of success. Will that guarantee that we will be successful in the future? Not necessarily. Just the values alone really don't do that. You really also need to be able to prepare. And that really requires extensive amount of planning. And many of you are familiar with a coach, a legendary coach here in the United States. He was a basketball coach by the name of John Wooden, won 10 consecutive national championships. It's a record that probably will never be broken. And Coach Wooden used to spend 4 hours every day that he had a practice planning a 2-hour practice. He would spend twice the amount of time preparing than he would for actual practice. And he believed, and here's the quote, failure to prepare is to preparing to fail. And I'm sure all of you have probably heard how important planning is. I didn't realize just how important it was until I was talking with the gentleman you see here on the right. That's Coach Bobby Bowden. Bobby was the head American football coach for Florida State University. And Bobby won many actually, national championships as their coach. Bobby also participated in a number of our research studies. Bobby also became a dear friend, and so sometimes we will share a stage together, and I will interview him because I know how to ask questions. The answers you really want to hear from Bobby, and so that's kind of what you see us here doing. But we had a conversation one time. It was during a study, and I was supposed to interview him on a Monday morning. Well, the previous Saturday, he had a football game against an arch rival, Clemson University. Excuse me. That afternoon, Saturday afternoon, Florida State University was the #1 ranked team in the United States. #1. Right? Clemson wasn't even ranked, not even in the top 25. But late Saturday night, it was Clemson who was the victorious team. Florida State lost, and they lost their national ranking. Now, I was supposed to talk to Bobby Monday morning. I didn't think he'd be in much of a mood to talk. Here's something else about that Saturday night. Bobby Bowden was the coach at Florida State University. The coach for the opposite team, Clemson University, was also somebody named Bowden, Terry Bowden. It was Bobby's son. So not only had Bobby lost a football game, his national one ranking, but he lost to his son. I was thinking he was going to be in an evil mood Monday morning and was not going to want to talk. But I called the secretary and I said, Coach probably doesn't want to talk with me this morning. And she said, no, no, no. He got in about a half hour ago and he said he was really looking forward to talking to me. I was thinking he was looking forward to yelling at me. But so we got on the call. And at the time, no one had won more football games in the history of college football than this guy you're looking at right now, Coach Bowden. And so how do you start a conversation with a man who just lost a very important game? So I started with something like, Coach, you know, as the all-time winningest football coach in America, you must love to win. And he was quiet for a second, which is highly unusual for Bobby. But then he said, you know, Paul, it's not so much that I love to win. Now think about this. Your attitude, coaches. What's your attitude towards winning and losing? Here was Bobby's. He said, it's not so much I love to win. And I said, well, that's unusual because you've done it a lot of times. He goes, no, when we win, it's because the athletes execute. It's the athletes who win games for us. Where I stand as a coach, I can't gain a single yard. I can't make any points. I can't tackle anybody. He said, it's the players who execute, and that's why we win. And then he said, but I will tell you this. I hate to lose. Whoa. The difference, coach? He said, when we lose, this is what it means. It means I didn't have my players prepared to be successful. And that's on me as the coach. Think about that. I didn't have my players prepared to be successful. And that's why we lost. And that, to me, was a key to why Bobby Bowden was so successful. Because when you lose and you look at yourself first, that is great. Now, we started to talk about the game itself. And so you didn't have your players prepared. And then he made this comment. He says, you know, when the game starts, all plans go out the window. Let me make sure I got you right, coach. When the game starts, all your planning goes out the window. And he says, yeah, it's useless at that point. So my next question is, then why do you spend so much time planning? And he says, you got to realize, and he said this to me, and I thought it had great wisdom. Planning isn't about scripting the future. It's about being prepared for it. And I can't think of anything more profound than the time that we're in right now with this COVID pandemic. Planning isn't about scripting the future. It's about being prepared for it. And that's what great coaches do. When they plan, they're not trying to script exactly what the team is going to do. They're trying to do, as Bobby said, prepare their players to be successful. It's a very different way of looking at it. And so based on that conversation, my research lab started to do a little investigation of planning. One of the things we did with coaches, we asked them to plan a 2-hour practice. Most of you probably have practices that last between 1 and 2 hours. If I asked you to plan your next practice, approximately how long would it take you? Now, we did that, and you keep that number in your head in minutes. We asked that, or we actually gave novice coaches and expert coaches at planning tasks. They were supposed to plan a 2-hour practice. We gave them the time, we gave them resources, the team, and so forth. So we found that the novices spent about 60 minutes planning a 2-hour practice. And when you looked at their plans, it was fairly reasonable. What shocked us, though, was the experts spent over 60% more time planning a 2-hour practice than the novices did. Who do you think needed more time planning, the experts or the novices? Obviously, the novices. But why the experts? Why so much time? Because they recognized just how critical a plan was. Not only for a practice, but also a game. And so they spent a great deal of time doing that. So when they plan, this was our next study, what do they do? And by the way, I've provided these notes to Azar, and he will distribute them to you. So don't really, if this is something you'd like to have, you will have a permanent record of this information. So what do they do when they plan? First of all, we find that they gather information all the time. They're always looking for new things, information about their players, information about their opponents, information about new techniques. In fact, I was just talking to Mr. K, and he's ordered a new book, looking for new information because it's on exercise physiology. All right. Why do I consider him an expert coach? Because this is exactly what he's doing right now. What's he going to do with that information? He's going to turn it into programs that are going to help coaches in Singapore be able to plan the physical training, the exercise physiology, if you will, to a higher level, because he's always gathering new information. All right. You have to assess your personnel. Who are our athletes? What do they need to do? Everybody's a little bit unique. Every team changes depending on the personnel. It's not about the strategies. It's about the people. Again, think about Bobby. When they're successful, it's because the athletes execute. And when they're failing, it's because he didn't have them prepared to be successful. You got to set goals. What are our goals? I'm going to speak a little bit about this when I talk about controlling the controllables, but what are your goals? What's your purpose? And let me just give you one question right now. At the end of the next practice you have with your athletes, what do you want them to be able to do at the end of that practice that they cannot do right now? And if you can't tell me the answer to that question, it means there's no reason for you to have a practice. Practice is about trying to accomplish something, achieve something that's going to help your athletes be successful. So when you walk into a practice, have it clearly in your head. What are they going to do today that will benefit them tomorrow or the next time that they have to compete? Set those goals and then select the actions to meet those goals. What do we have to do today that's going to allow us to achieve our goals tomorrow? And then acquiring resources. All right. Most of us in what we do is if we are planning, let's just say a drill, for example, it's going to need some kind of equipment. We're going to need some kind of facility. What kind of resources do we need? Or we may need some things like, so how about some video? Or how about something that we might be able to get on the internet? And then finally, set contingencies. In other words, plan B, plan C, plan D. What happens if this doesn't work out? What do I do next? What if the athletes show up to practice and they're just not motivated that day? What do I do? Or let's say they accomplish the goals much sooner. What's the next step? So you're always thinking, what if? What if this happens? What if that happens? And right there are the key characteristics or traits that we saw in great coaches. Let me share one more story about preparation with you. The gentleman you see here on the right is Mike Budenholzer. Those of you that are basketball fans might recognize that name. Bud is his nickname. Bud was the head coach of the Atlanta Hawks. And when Bud was with the Hawks, I was doing some work with him in his coaching skills and his assistant coaches. Just a little background on Bud. He came to the Atlanta Hawks in about 2013. His second year in the NBA, he was named the NBA Head Coach of the Year in only his second year as a head coach. Now, part of that, in my opinion, was because both his parents are teachers. And so Bud knew something about teaching. His dad was a high school basketball coach. And Bud said, growing up on my father's knees, I knew how to, chart the X's and O's from a young age and analyze talent. But right after he won the Coach of the Year, I saw him and I congratulated him. But I had this question for him. I said, Bud, NBA Coach of the Year, what skill or skills do you think you have or did that allowed you to win this award over your colleagues? What do you do differently? Or what do you do better than the rest of these coaches? And again, we're talking the National Basketball Association. Without hesitating, he said, player relationships. He said, I think I have great relationships with my players. And that's the key to being successful as a coach. And again, it kind of reminds me of what Bowden just said. And then he looked at me and he said, okay, what do you think I do differently than anybody else? And I said, Bud, I'll be honest with you. I think your organization and preparation is better than virtually any coach I've ever seen. Let me share this with you. This is one of his practice plans from the time that he was, you'll see it says 2014 up at the top. Well, March 31st, 2014. That was the year he won the NBA Coach of the Year. You see his name up on the sheet because every time I would go to practice, he knew I was going to ask for his plan. He had it memorized. He would just hand me his plan. A couple of things I wanted to point out to you. First of all, look how extensive this is. As a coach, you do planning, don't you? All right. Let's take a look at Bud's plan. If you look at the top line, Atlanta Hawks shoot around in the National Basketball Association. If it's a practice on a game day, they don't call it a practice, they call it a shoot around. I don't know why that's the terminology. The date's up there, and their opponent in parentheses is the Philadelphia 76ers. Look all the way to the left, and you'll see a column of numbers. That's the amount of time in 50, or it's going to be 60 minutes. The practice is about 60 minutes only, and that's what the NBA says. If you look, that's the amount of time each of those activities is going to take. Now, this is how thorough he is. If you notice in parentheses, that's the running time. So if we were 36 minutes into the practice, you look down, he should be on, by the way, it says script. That's their term for plays. They call them scripts rather than plays in most cases. They should be on the crowd script or practice play. And by the way, in parentheses, you see that's going to be run by an assistant coach, and his name is Kenny Atkinson. And I'm going to talk about Kenny at the end of this presentation. All right. And so that's where they should be 36 minutes into it. Now, does Bud follow this exact? No, there's some flexibility in this. So he knows where to make some adjustments. Now, let's move over to the right. Going down, you'll see there's personnel, game plan, and film. They roll out a big screen TV onto the court. The players sit where they're going to sit during the game, and they go over each of the people on the Philadelphia 76ers team. And I know many of you are not in a position where you can do this. You can do it to some degree in terms of preparing your team for who they're going to compete against, if that's an important characteristic, as it is in basketball. So they went over each player, what their shooting is like. Are they experiencing any injuries? What are their strengths? What are their limitations? You also notice one of those players is identified as a foul guy. That's the person at the end of the game that they will foul if they need to get the ball back. All right. So already we're thinking strategies. So they go over all the personnel, and then they do walkthroughs. They don't run, but they set the players up on the court, and they will walk through the plays the 76ers most often use. And so the team will begin to understand what they're likely going to see that night from the other team. And then 21 minutes into the practice, they'll start a warm-up. And Jeff Watkins was their strength and conditioning coach. Watt led it, and so they called it the Watt warm-up. And you see it just last 8 minutes. It's mostly stretching because the players have been in shooting around in the gym a little bit. And then they get into the activities, the drills that they're going to do, and they're all designed for what they're going to use that night. Very strategic. You know, it's like, for example, the Philadelphia plays, the ups and downs that they're going to do. Big and small shootings is towards the end of it. And you see EOG, that's end of game script. And then they end the practice with a free throw game, FT. Jim was one of the assistant coaches. He designed a competitive game that they do 5 minutes at the end of practice. And so they should be into that game at the 50-minute mark for 10 minutes, and then the practice is over. Very carefully scripted out, very carefully tailored towards their success that night against the 76ers. And so I have similar practice plans when Bud has a training program. Again, a very thorough type of planning. So being prepared is a key aspect of success for any team. All right, I'd like to, this is I think it's kind of fun. I mentioned that you got to be able to see and seize opportunities. Great coaches see things the rest of us kind of miss. And I'm going to show you exactly how they do that. And they seize on those opportunities to be successful. All right, you ready to do a little activity? You don't have to know anything about tennis. I don't know. Do we have any tennis coaches here? You may have an advantage over the rest of us with this one. But what I'm going to do, we did this study with tennis coaches. In fact, the novice coaches had been coaching tennis for 1 year or less. They were full-time tennis coaches. They had spent a lifetime in tennis. The expert coaches had all been named Coach of the Year by the International Professional Tennis Registry, internationally regarded for their success as tennis coaches. We had 24 of those. We had about 27 novices. Sat them all in the room. We showed them a series of slides. This is one of those slides. We showed the slides for only about, I think it was 10 seconds. And already it's been up there about 30 seconds. Then we shut the slide off and we asked them to write down everything they remember. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this slide off, and I'd like you to use the chat function. And I'd like you to type in there what you remember from this slide. Okay, you ready? I'm going to turn it off. Okay, in the chat box, would you write down what do you remember from the slide? And Azar, can you read some of the responses for us, if you don't mind?
Sure. So coaches, if you're here with us, do write down in the chat box what you remember of that particular slide that Paul showed earlier. All right, Paul, we have one response to say player facing the sun, left-handed. Any more responses from coaches here?
We need at least one more response before we move on. Come on. What do you remember?
Hitting with the backhand,
Okay,
player
good.
wearing a cap.
Good.
He's in white shorts and white top.
All
There's
right.
a number 4 in the background.
Very good.
It's like a red flower, number 4. It's at the front of the court. Any more responses, coaches? Come on. Let's see how well you can recollect and you can remember that particular slide, yeah?
Let me ask, are you interested in seeing what the novice coaches and what the expert coaches saw?
Yeah, I think they're probably eager to see that.
All right. Novices are upper left, experts are lower right. What do they see as the difference, Azar? Could you ask them to type that in the chat? What's the difference?
Right. So coaches, you can hear, you heard Paul's question. If you look at the novice, their recollection on the top left there versus the expert on the bottom right.
Mm-hmm. What's the difference?
What do you see? Yeah, so Julie says the expert sees the technical aspects.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else?
I think we need to serve a little
focus.
coping.
Yeah, Mingjun talk about focusing on body movement.
Great.
The focus is on the players, whereas the novice seems to be focusing on other things that may not be kind of relevant for the performance, at least, of that particular player.
Good. All right, let me share with you what we did when we analyzed the data. The original study actually was to test the theory that experts see more than novices or see more than the rest of us. Well, what we found out was they do not. If you look in the blue boxes and the red boxes, we called those cues. The experts and the novices saw almost the same number of cues. So the difference wasn't in the quantity of the information. The difference was in the quality of the information. They saw the same amount, but they saw it differently. And here's what we came to in terms of conclusions. Right? The experts found they were looking for opportunities. Now, again, these were expert coaches. The novice coaches were not looking for these. So how did they find the opportunities? They, first of all, were focusing on things that would influence the player's results, the outcome, the quality of the shot. And if it didn't influence the outcome, they didn't pay attention to it. They didn't notice the number 4. They didn't notice the cars in the parking lot. They were exclusively focused on things that were going to make that player successful, the results, the outcome. And when you think about how you watch your athletes in action, do you focus on the things that will influence their performance or their results? Next, they focused only on things that were under their control. In other words, if they couldn't control it or the athletes couldn't control it, it was irrelevant information. It was a distraction. You know, the fact that the player was wearing a white outfit didn't influence results. And by the way, the coach couldn't control that. So what difference does it make? The sun, you can't control that. You can control your actions to it, but you can't control the sun. So focus on the things that you can control. Anything that you focus on that's out of your control is a waste of your time. It's a waste of emotion. So don't let anger take over and distort the way you see things. Look for the things that you can control, because here's the key. Of the things that you can control, and this was what the experts saw, what do I need to change that's going to influence the results? And that's where they saw the opportunities. When they looked at their players performing, they were always wondering, like Bowden was, how do I increase the quality of this player's performance? How do I increase the quality of this team's performance? What's going to impact results? What's under my control or the athlete's control? What needs to change? And when you frame your thinking like that, you begin to think like an expert coach. When you start focusing on things that are out of your control, like, for example, a bad call from a referee, that's a complete waste of time. Get over it. Focus on the things that you need to change to make your team successful. And then you'll be thinking like an expert coach. Then you'll be seeing opportunities that you can seize that will make a difference in your team's performance. All right. The last point I wanted to share with you is about control, because we just talked about how important it is, specifically commanding the kinds of things that will make you successful as a coach, but more importantly, your athletes and your team successful as athletes and as people. So let's take a look at it. There was a very famous women's basketball coach here in the United States named Pat Summitt. She's passed due to cancer, unfortunately, but she was a dominant coach. And what we're talking about here is controlling the controllables. And here's similar to what Bowden was saying, our emphasis is on execution, not on winning, because you can't control whether or not your team's going to win or whether your team is going to lose. The other team may play better, or the other player may play better, or run faster, or jump higher, or lift more weights. But what you can emphasize is the execution of your players, the execution of your team. And that's what she focused on. The winning would take care of itself if you got it to a higher standard. All right. I mentioned a coach named Kenny Atkinson. He was an assistant coach with the Atlanta Hawks. Well, 4 years ago, he was named the head coach of the Brooklyn Nets. And I'm going to share with you a story that not a lot of people know, and some pictures that I can't share with you because you're not supposed to take pictures of where I take pictures. But you're coaches, and I think this will make the point for you and hopefully help you with your athletes. So Kenny was hired as the head coach for the Brooklyn Nets. This was in 2016. And so he called and he said, Paul, would you want to come up to training camp? Because I used to go to the Hawks training camp. He says, I'd love you to be here, and I've got some questions, some things to talk about. So I had just shown up, and Kenny had a big smile on his face. This was just before the first training camp practice that he was going to have. And so the players were about to walk in about a half hour. So we had a chance to chat, and he had a couple of concerns. And the biggest one was he had inherited a team that was the worst basketball team in the National Basketball Association. the worst team in basketball. In fact, he said one of his comments was, if we play a high school team, I don't even know if we can beat them. So what do you do? This was his concern. What do you do with players who you know day in and day out are going to lose? And how do you keep them motivated? How do you keep them trying to improve? How do you keep them believing in themselves? Have you ever faced that challenge as a coach? How do you keep your players wanting and thirsting for improvement, believing that they can actually be successful in something when all of the odds are tragically against them? And so Kenny and I continued to talk, and I offered this to him. It actually came out of a study of business leaders, and it was research done by Harvard Business Review. And they've written a book about it, and they call it the progress principle. And this is the progress principle. Of all the things that can boost emotions, motivation, and perceptions during a workday, the single most important is making progress in meaningful work. And I said, Kenny, that's your challenge. You have to identify, first of all, the things that are under your control. The things that are going to, if changed, are going to make a difference in the results. Does that mean you're going to win every night? No, of course not. But it does mean that there are things that you can measure that will show the players that they're making progress. For example, in basketball, as most of you know, there's a shooting percentage. What if you increased a player's shooting percentage or number of points per game that they score, or number of successful passes they made or steals they made? If you improve certain statistics and enough players are improving those statistics, your team is going to improve and you're going to start to win games. So he and I had this conversation, and he began to think a little bit differently about how he was going to approach it. It wasn't about winning and losing. It was about what is meaningful for us as a team. He created a culture of success. What's meaningful for us as a team, but also what's meaningful to you as an individual athlete. Professional athletes have to show some level of success because that's how they get paid. And so as they began to see that under Kenny took a sincere effort to make them successful, identified things that were meaningful for them and to the team, and they were making progress, the motivation remained. By the way, this is the Brooklyn Nets training facility. This is the basketball court that they work. If you don't recognize, out the window, that tall building is One World Trade Center. Their facility looks at Lower Manhattan. And if you look way to the left, you can't see it in the window. There's the Statue of Liberty. So it's a fabulous view that they have. I think that has something to do with motivation. But let's go back to making progress in meaningful work. Let's talk about the controllable factors that will help them be successful. Well, first is training, physical training. And again, Mr. K, I think the idea that you're looking at their exercise physiology, because you have to have your athletes, regardless of the sport, at peak physical fitness levels. And one of Kenny's commitments, and the players agreed, was that we were going to be more physically fit than any other team in the National Basketball Association. We could control that. And so let's seize that. And then let's measure that. What are we doing this week that's at a higher standard than we were a week ago? What's our resting heart rate, for example? Or how many laps are we running? Or how much are we bench pressing? And so they kept records of that so they could measure their success in training. Meaningful progress. Skill development. They did not have the most talented players in the National Basketball Association. But given the talent, what skills do we need to develop to make us more successful? And most of you know enough about basketball to know different positions require different skills. It's the same, for example, in football. If I was a midfielder or a fullback or a striker, the type of skills I might need would vary a little bit. So Kenny was able to work with these players individually and say, okay, what skills do you will make the most difference in your contribution to this team? Do we need to increase your ability to rebound? Do we need to increase your ability to score points? What are we going to do to help you shoot better? How about your passing or your ability to play defense? And so they had very defined skills and practiced those skills. Next, strategy. Team has to have strategy in a game like basketball. And I'm sure all of you, whether you're talking water polo or you're talking volleyball or you're talking tennis or you're talking football, strategies is a key aspect to success. The team has to know how to play together. As Bud Budenholzer mentioned, team building, player relationships. The player on the left is Jeremy Lin. Jeremy was one of Kenny's players when Kenny was an assistant coach from the New York Knicks. Jeremy had a very successful time there. In fact, New York went crazy and they called it Lin's Insanity. When Kenny became head coach at Brooklyn, Jeremy asked for a trade from the Charlotte Hornets to the Brooklyn Nets because he wanted to play for Kenny. And so player relationships was a very key point. Not just player relationships, but what about the team? Feeling like they were a family, that they had mutual support. Go back to the values from the gold standards, the pride they had in each other, unselfishness, support for one another. So Kenny would do things like have family meals where wives, girlfriends, children could come in, and the Nets would do this. And so they got to know each other as people as well as players. And this I thought was brilliant. Recognition. Go back to making meaningful progress. How do one of your players know if they're actually making any meaningful progress in things? Well, perhaps there's ways you can recognize that. One of the things Kenny did, this is the locker room, is he put up that video screen that you see on the left side of the slide. And what he would do is have his video person, the night that the game was played, is to screen that, and he would look for certain things that were measures of the success that the team was making on those factors. For example, if a player had a particularly good night shooting free throws, that player would be featured making those free throws up there. If there were a play that they executed fairly successfully, that play would be up there. And you can't see it, but there would be written words down at the bottom. So for example, Azar, scores 40 points by making 3 or 12 3-point shots. So the players, even though they lost the game, they walked into the locker room the next day and they felt that they were successful on something that was meaningful. And that became a critical part of it. All right, so the question really is, and I know this is an important question for you as a coach in Singapore, because if you're not successful, you don't coach for very long, do you? You're going to lose your position. Well, here's what that strategy did for the Nets. Kenny's first year was 2015. That's the picture that you saw. That year, they won 21 games. If you look on the left-hand column, they lost 61 games. Not a very successful season. But following this plan that Kenny had, focusing on the things that were meaningful, controlling the variables that you can control or the factors you can control, and making the changes that would make them successful. In just 3 years, they won twice the number of games in the National Basketball Association, a highly competitive league where everybody that wears one of those uniforms is an extremely good player. Doubled the number of games in 3 years. Now, that blue line you see there on just above the Pistons, those are the people who made the playoffs. So the first time in probably since the earth began to cool, the Brooklyn Nets made the playoffs. They had a winning season. And how did that happen? They didn't get any superstars. Now, that's another story for another time. They brought in superstars this year, and they didn't bring the right people in. It crumbled the culture, and they didn't experience the same level of success. But following the formula I just showed you, yes, they were successful. So my question to you is this. Of these 4 strategies to build and lead successful teams, I would suggest, can you just identify which one would you adopt that you think would make the biggest difference in your coaching, make the biggest difference for you to help build and lead a successful team? And just in the chat box, and Azar, could you read these? Just type in 1, 2, 3, or 4. Let us know which one. And here's why I just suggest you do 1. Because if you concentrate on 1, you can master it. If you try to do 4, you're going to spread yourself so thin, I don't think you're going to experience any success. Which of these do you think would help your team or help your athletes to be primarily successful? Go ahead, type that in the chat if you would.
Yeah, so you heard the question.
Yeah, thank you, Azar.
So the 4 strategies that Paul is putting up on the screen here, just type in the chat box which one would you prioritize. Would that be correct, Paul?
Yes, just the one number.
Yeah. So we have 1s and 2s so far.
Ah, great. I like that. Any more?
Yeah, 2s have come out as the most.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, mostly 2s are coming in.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah, more 2s coming in. Yeah.
All right. Well, if we do this again, Azar, I'll spend more time on preparation and planning. This is great because it's such a critical factor to somebody's success as a coach. It really is. I was amazed in studying these coaches, just how much they emphasize that. And you saw with Budenholzer, and Kenny did the same thing, Bobby Bowden. Yeah.
Paul, we're not quite into Q&A yet. I'm just curious, does it reflect something specifically for coaches to be choosing 1 versus 2 versus 3 or 4?
No. It really is personal, Azar. That's a great question. They can all of those strategies work and help. But my thought was, if I was a coach and I saw these 4 strategies, which one would help me the most? And I know as a coach, like, for example, you mentioned I do some coaching with professional golf players. For me, it would be number 3. I need to focus more clearly on identifying the things that will influence a player's performance and getting rid of the symptoms, if you will, and focusing on the causes and what kinds of changes will make the change and improvement. Because sometimes you make a change and it makes an athlete worse. So number 3 for me would be the one that would help my coaching the best. So these coaches identifying 2 or 1, this is what's going to help their coaching. There's no right or wrong answer here.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
Yeah. And it kind of sets me up for the just before we get to the Q&A. There's my contact information. If they want to discuss any of this with me or want additional information, I'm happy to do that. I could set up a Zoom call with them, or we could email. I can send them whatever they would like. You want to take some time for Q&A?
Yeah, thanks for that, Paul. I'm sure many of them will be eager to link up with you again. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing with us this morning. This is certainly something that we think are of good value for our coaches. I shared with you previously how we, kind of a young nation, and certainly in sports, there's still a long way to go compared to established nations like America or UK, Australia. So this sharing today was really wonderful about particularly the 4 points, right? The creating that culture, that preparation, that see and seize opportunities, and finally that control, or rather control the controllables, right? Control what you can control. So I think that's really great. To participants here in the chat, you can maybe put up your hands if you have a question you want to ask Paul directly, or you can also type it into the chat box and I'll pick it up and I'll ask Paul the question that you have. But as they're typing in, Paul, and as they're thinking about what questions to ask you, just to share that yesterday I had a reunion with my first batch of athletes. So when I graduated from NIE, in '98. I went to Raffles, and that year that was my first school, the first team that I coached, and we went to the first finals
Wow.
against our arch rival. So it was good that the boys 20 years on have connected.
Wow.
And I was reflecting how, if not for the COVID, we would probably not connected with each other this way, you know. So that's
Yeah.
the positive thing that came out of COVID. So we connected
Right.
last night. It was meant to be an
Wow.
hour-long sort of meetup. It turned out to
Uh-huh.
be close to 3 hours of catching up. And I
Wow.
thought it was interesting that they shared with me their thoughts and their feelings and their recollections and reflections of, you know, being in the team and how the training that we went through. And for me as a coach back then, I was a young teacher, a young coach, certainly inexperienced. And I wish I had known about these four things so that I can, you know, start to create that culture, prepare a little bit more rather than be a
Right.
novice person in a novice coach in preparation. I'll probably try to aim for you know, spending a long time preparing for my training sessions and so on, and seeing and seizing the opportunity, so I don't see the white shirt and the cap and the number 4, but I'm seeing you know, the techniques and the tactics and so on,
Right.
and starting to control. So I guess the training in our formal coaching education, and certainly in NIE and in SP back then, gave us, you know, some kind of grounding.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that, you know, to hone our skills in all these four aspects requires really experience on the ground,
Yes.
actually
Oh,
applying all of this? Yeah.
yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Experience is critical. And the other thing that I find, and you just put it beautifully, Azar, is these coaches are always looking to learn. And again, I brought out, I mean, how long is I keep talking about Mr. K, but I mean, how long has he been in the business? And he's talking about books he's ordering. You know,
Yeah.
that's what makes the great ones. It really is. And he's the kind of gentleman that I mean, all he's accomplished in his lifetime, he could just sit there and say, look at what I know, you know, my experience alone. But he's not. He's always open to new ideas. That was one of the things that I just loved conversations with him at the time. And I feel honored that he's on this call. But yes, that's what they do. And I hear you doing that as well. And I am too. That's why I'm a researcher. I'm trying to study to understand really what makes these people so good at what they do. And I feel lucky that they share some of that information with me.
So I guess the other key thing would be that thirst for knowledge and thirst for continuous improvement. Right.
Yeah.
So that, would you say that would be one of the traits of an expert coach?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. In fact, if you don't mind, what I was going to share with you, the last slide was this. If you want to, where are we here? Yeah. You know, we all in sports, we often think it's really about winning, but truly, if we want to win, as a coach, we have to look within. The great coaches are the ones that always look to themselves first when they face a challenge. They don't look to blame other people. They don't look to blame their athletes, their lack of resource. Again, one of the things I love about Singapore, we were talking about the little red dot. I mean, you got to love the spirit of Singapore. You know, and they built it up themselves. Lee Kuan Yew never complained. He always was looking for a solution to the challenges we face. And to me, he would be a great model for any coach. I bet if he was a sport coach, Manchester United would not be the team that they are. It would be Singapore football program would be the dominant program. Again, because, you know, if we look within ourselves first and say, what do I need to change? What can I do better? That's going to influence the athletes. So I thank you for that.
Yeah. Paul, there's a question that has just come in, and I think it's related to e-workshop of a webinar that we had last week about building a positive culture.
Yes.
Would you say that it's something that's quite challenging to set up for a coach going into a team or a group of athletes? he's new to that, he or she is new to that group, and trying to establish that culture would be something that would take quite a bit of time to establish.
Yes, I would agree with that. And if I could use Kenny Atkinson again, Kenny was, as far as a coach, he was a fairly young coach in the National Basketball Association. He was in his mid-30s. He had never played in the NBA. And most of the players on the team were experienced players. So he had what most people would consider very little credibility. So how does he go in and create a positive culture? You know, he's not going to stand up there and just demand that people follow him to the floor. So what he did is he started with player relationships, individually, and then slowly as teams. And that's, in fact, one of the pieces of advice I gave him, I said, Kenny, convince your players that you're the world's best listener, and they'll talk to you. And you don't coach basketball, you coach players. And I think once you begin to make those relationships, I think that's when you can begin to shape the culture in positive ways, because you'll understand who these people are as people first. Will that make you successful? I can't guarantee that, but I think that's the way to begin is I want to help you be successful. Most great coaches know that if the athletes aren't successful, as a coach, you're not going to be considered successful. So it's a very, very difficult challenge. I agree, but start with the players. Start by getting to know them.
I mean, that's certainly something that resonates strongly with us about, you know, you don't coach the sport, isn't it? You coach the people in the sport.
Yep.
And therefore, the cornerstone of, you know, coaching is really that relationship with the athletes and the relationship that you always strive to build up. So the next question is, what about, you know, the people that are connected to the athletes, like, you know, the parents, and in Singapore, a lot of particularly the younger kids, they've got, you know, strong influence by the parents, and sometimes too strong, to the point that it perhaps you ask yourself whether is this what the kid wants or is this what the parent wants. So what would your advice be in terms of, as a coach, particularly coaching young players, how do we make that connection with the parents, and how we can build that relationship with the parents as well?
I'll answer that in two ways. One is I know a coach in Canada who's been very effective in working with parents. And what he does is he's a golf coach, and he brings in the parents for a parents meeting before every season starts. And sometimes he'll meet with the parents during the season as well. And he shares with them research, and I'll share this with you, Azar, if it's something you think will help you. He's got a sheet that he gives the parents, and he says, this is what the research says makes athletes successful, that their parents do for them. And it's things like when an athlete fails to perform at your expectation or their expectation, you're supportive. For young athletes, it's most important that they have fun out there. And so if a parent creates a situation where it's not fun, you'll drive the child from sport. So he shares this with all of the parents together, and they talk amongst themselves. And then Henry tries to give some examples of parents he's had in the past and situations that have come up, and how these parents have positively influenced their children in situations where, had they done something differently, it could have been a disaster. And so I thought the parents meeting was really helpful. And again, if the coach who asked that question would like that information, I can email Henry and see if I can get that from him. But yeah, maybe, yeah, I'm thinking, I wonder if, you know, like the coaches of Singapore in particular sports might get together and try to develop what might be considered a parent's creed, what they would like to see their parents do. And if all the coaches say, this is what we look for in the parents of our players, and meet with the parents, you know, maybe that would work. Because a lot of times I think the parents are well-meaning, they're just not educated.
Yeah. So that's something that we are certainly looking at. You probably know about the incidents relating to, say, sport, in recent times. So that's something we want to educate them as well. But I think that creed that you talk about would be something important to look at,
Yeah.
because we do unfortunately still have, you know, over enthusiastic and overzealous parents from the sidelines,
Yes.
shouting
Yeah.
and things.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with cheering the kids and the team on,
Right.
but sometimes it crosses the line.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to what you shared earlier about the four things. And one of the coaches who was watching this particular webinar on Facebook asked if you could elaborate point three a little bit more, and that's the C and C's opportunity, and if possible with reference to golf. So I'm guessing this is a golf coach who's asking
Ah.
this question.
Hmm.
Can you elaborate a little bit more about that C and seizing opportunities?
Okay. Yeah. The three things that we need to do as a coach is, first of all, you have to know what makes a skill execution successful. You have to know enough about the sport, either the strategy or the technique. And then you watch a player perform and you're looking for patterns in their performance. And so then of that, you're trying to identify what you can control, or another way to think about it is what you can change that's going to increase the quality of the performance. And I remember a couple of times, one of the times that I discovered something is a player just didn't have the ball in the right position before he hit it. It was too far forward. And so he wasn't making a clean contact. So it was just talking with him, and I asked, "Is the ball always there?" And he goes, "I never thought about where the ball is." And so they began to talk about that, and so it began to make a difference for him. But yeah, seeing and seizing opportunities. It's really about what am I watching, and where are the opportunities. Um, if I could give you another example, we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? Many people are focused on the problem of the pandemic. I can't go outside now, or I have to wear a mask now, or this isn't going to happen. There are some people who are thinking, all right, all of that is happening and it's happening to everybody, but where are the opportunities? What can I do now that I wasn't able to do before? And I'll give you one example: this Zoom call. If it wasn't for the pandemic, you probably wouldn't have these Monday motivations. And so
Yep.
you saw an opportunity because of a situation. And so that's seeing and seizing opportunities, because really, as your question was, what can we do in this pandemic that's going to help develop our coaches? And this was a solution to that. Yeah, I like that. I don't know if that answered the question entirely. If not, please tell that coach they're welcome to email me, and we can either do a Zoom call or I can send more information. Happy to do either.
Yeah. So I mean, what I picked up from that response from you, Paul, is really about coaches first needing to understand or know intimately the skill and the skill execution, so that you
Yeah,
know what to look out for.
yeah,
Otherwise, that you don't won't know where to start, right? And I guess
exactly.
this leads to another question that's just come in from Tong Hai, who is one of our staff and also looking at developing coaches in our academies and clubs.
Yeah.
So his question is, what would your advice be if we were to be coaching coaches instead of players? What can we do, and what should we do to develop them to become better coaches?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is coaches are uncoachable. No, I'm just kidding. um, in a way, that's what I do. Actually, that's kind of a question that I would like to have with him. Just he and I can have a conversation about that. But it depends on, I think, what the coaches need, what their backgrounds and experiences are. And I like to start with that. Many coaches in the United States, youth coaches, are parents with very little sport background. And so to me, they need to begin with the things that they're strong in, and that's player relationships, getting the kids to have fun. And then they need to start to think about, okay, how do I teach these kids to, for example, in American baseball, to bat? Well, maybe somebody another parent on the team was a former baseball player, and they could come in and give batting instructions. And so a coach needs to be aware of what the strengths are and what their limitations are and work from there. And that would be my first suggestion with the coaches, is to try to understand what they bring and what they need to develop in the future. And oftentimes people are pretty good at knowing that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Paul. I suppose it's quite similar, right? In order for us to really develop a player, we need to understand and need to know them, and that comes from a strong relationship. So similarly, if we're going to be wearing the hat of a coach developer, it's important also to understand who is this coach we're going to be working with, so that we know what areas, what aspects of his coaching we can help to develop. Yeah.
Maybe this will help. When we ran the training camps for the Swedish professional golfers, it was a week-long camp, 5 days. We started Monday morning at 8 o'clock, and we would give them an index card with a pencil. And we would say, at the end of this week, what are 3 things that you would like to be able to do that you can't do right now? And so we would collect those, and those would help shape what our training programs would be. And I think if you did that, if you did that with your coaches, and I'm sure like everybody on the call, that's why I threw up, of these 4 strategies, which one do you think would be most helpful to you?
Yeah. That's a good point. That's certainly something that we can try. I'm sure Tong Hai will try it. He's got about 250 coaches in the academies and clubs, and obviously they're looking at improving the way they coach, because that has an impact on the experiences of the athletes in the academies and clubs that they are in across different sports. So thanks for that.
Okay. Could you? I've got another idea for him. Could you? I think I have his email, don't I?
Yes, you do.
Okay. I'm going to send him a couple of suggestions.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Paul, thanks so much. It seems we have kind of run out of time, but you have flashed your contacts earlier, and I'm sure there are many coaches here, as well as those who are watching us live on Facebook, who will be keen to connect with you and seek your advice, so that they too can be on that wonderful journey of becoming an expert coach. And that's certainly what we would like for all Singapore coaches to strive towards. And to your point earlier, it doesn't matter whether you're coaching kids or you're coaching adults or you're coaching novices versus you're coaching experts. I think those 4 principles would certainly be good guidance in terms of them achieving to certainly become a better coach than what they are now. And that's kind of related to our hashtag. We have a hashtag, coaching better every day, and that's what we want our coaches to always strive to do. So once again, Paul, thank you so much. It's really a privilege to have you with us on this Motivational Monday. I'm sure the coaches here and those on Facebook will now have a positive start to the new week. I know it's Sunday night for you, so it's not end of last week yet. But I hope the interaction today certainly energized you to continue to do good work, for which we can leverage on to learn from what you are learning, what you have learned, so that we can help our coaches here in Singapore become a lot better, a lot stronger.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for that. Yeah. Any last words, any final words of wisdom or inspiration from you, Paul, before we close the session?
No, just go Singapore.